Redfall is an open-world co-op RPG where up to 4 players face off against vampires. It's been a year since it was announced, so here to give us an update on how everything is going is Harvey Smith from Arkane Studios. Harvey, how are you?
I'm great. We got to come out and show the first look at Redfall gameplay here at the Xbox Bethesda game showcase. It was great.
So Arkane is known for excellent story and gameplay. Like, you guys make some really magical games that just bind those two together so well. Multiplayer options bring in a new challenge. So will it be harder to go alone if you're playing in this, or is it more formatted so that it's balanced either way?
That's the important part, and Redfall is made so you can play through the campaign solo, and you don't have bots with you for the other characters or whatever. You're just purely solo. You pick Layla, Jacob, Devender, or Remy. You're alone, you go through the world. It's not a super hardcore stealth game, but stealth is a factor. The AI is based on awareness with sight and sound. You can use stealth to get an advantage on people or to bypass a conflict or whatever, to avoid fighting if you're wounded or weak right now. So that is the way the single player just goes through the campaign, and there's no special mode for multiplayer or any of that. If you play with other people, 1 other person, 2 other people, 3 other people, for a total of 4, it becomes more and more party-like, of course. It's probably our closest to being a party game, you know. But solo is very much a classic Arkane experience.
Okay. Does progress save for each person who joins the game? So, like, is it tied mostly to one person's game, or it was like, oh, I only want to play the next chapter with you. Can I just like hop in and then go back and play the next chapter by myself after that? Our
current answer is whoever hosts the session, initiates the session, their progress is persistent for them, but other people, it's not, right? Okay. Your character progress is. Like any weapons you find, any levels you gain, all of that is persistent. But in terms of what missions you've unlocked and such, the host, their progression matters. Okay. If you sign on with your friend and they're halfway through the game and you play the second half of the game with them, and then you need to go back and you want to play on your own, you'll be starting at the beginning of the campaign with a character. Okay. Like when we started talking about that and working on it, we imagined a scenario where every mission you played, we checkbox that you got credit for that. Like you've done that one. But then you end up with this weird problem where like, okay, but I'm going to start, I've been playing with you, but now I'm going to play on my own. So I start playing through the campaign, but then I start hitting missions that I've already done. So for the flow of things, you want to have to redo those. Right. The story would be very confusing if you got to a mission 8 and it said, skip this one because you've already done it or whatever, right? So we just decided to your hero and your gear and your experience points, that stuff is always persistent, but your mission flow is persistent if you're the host. Can we change characters after we started the game? No, you cannot. Okay. You start the campaign with Layla, for instance. You're bound to Layla through the campaign missions, side missions, the whole flow of the game to the end game. And then after that, you can play again with Layla and keep advancing her, or you can start a new character or whatever, but you can't switch characters mid-track. And currently we have no plans to respec either. Okay. Like, you can start a new playthrough and try a different set of powers, different set of weapons, etc. But currently when you start the campaign with a character, you're committed all the way through. How flexible are the character builds? Like, speaking of not being able to respec, like, is there a specific class type per character? I did see on one of the weapons, if you paused it during the trailer today, that says like support value on a weapon. Like, what does that mean, and how does that impact how we play? Every hero is made up of a bunch of choices you can make through the trees. They all have 3 primary active powers that you can upgrade in a bunch of different ways, and then they have some passive powers. And then there are a set of skills that are kind of common across all the characters, like can I carry more medical resources or more lockpicks or whatever. In Devender's case, he has a power called Black Light, which you saw used where he held it up and the UV light went out and petrified all the vampires around, which is temporary. They start to thaw out basically, but you can stake them while they're petrified. And there are hazards in the world, like where somebody set up a tripod with some UV light, and if a vampire moves through it, dynamically they get petrified. So you can sneak up and turn it off because, let's say an enemy faction is like walking around those petrified vampires or whatever. You can use that to your advantage. But he has a power actively where he goes, you shall not pass. Or shall not And you can upgrade that different ways. Bigger radius, longer effect,
Okay.
etc. And then also the weapons you choose, because your weapons are leveled, so you need a higher level weapon. And then the weapons come with rarities, so they have all these different traits on them that affect gameplay. And then on top of that, you have a few other equipment items that affect gameplay. We have the concept of these things called remnants, which are like objects the vampires were around when, say, one of them becomes a vampire and like the world warps around them psychically. It will imbue something like the rabbit's foot on their keychain, or you know, some object they're carrying can be a remnant now psychically charged, and you can find those and carry them, and they modify gameplay in some way. They're basically magic items.
Okay, awesome. How open is the open world? I think that's always a question. So like with Breath of the Wild, you could actually go anywhere. But with similar things, it's like, no, this is very heavy blocked. You cannot go past this part until you've done X, Y, Z.
It's mostly very open. In fact, at first it was too open. It was kind of like there was not enough blocking you or channeling you, but it's very, very open. Rooftops and alleys and streets of this small town, Redfall, Massachusetts, which is like a, you know, fishing community, a tourist community, quaint, historic New England stuff. With this stealthy, you know, takeover by vampires, right? But the one thing that we do in terms of that gating pretty heavily is we divided the world into 2 districts.
Okay.
So District 1 is the first half of the missions, and it's the downtown part of Redfall, and District 2 is more rural. It's farms, lighthouses, churches, things like that.
Is the door shown in the trailer a psychic nest?
As you guessed, we have a feature called nests, which are kind of a shared psychic space where the vampires are basically sort of like tripping together on what we call the blood trance.
Oh.
And different rules exist inside the nest. The psychic space doesn't have to adhere to normal, you know, architectural boundaries. That's why in the trailer you see them go into a movie theater, and instead of the screen, it transitions into this like wilderness-looking environment or whatever. But yes, that's a nest.
Okay. Are they replayable, and are they required?
You know, they're not required per se, but when you get to the center of the nest, and there's a heart there that has a powerful psychic remnant in it that you want, basically. And so they're replayable, they're fairly procedural. Those nests are made of room by room different tiles that can be stitched together dynamically, and so it's one of the more procedural parts of the game. On top of that, Arkane is known for AI that is sight and hearing based, and so even if your game is not a hardcore stealth game, having an AI that's like that just generates gameplay. Like you're moving across the world and you're moving into an area, you don't realize that you made a sound back there and somebody's following you now, or you accidentally lead one group of enemies into another group of enemies and they fight, you know. It's like that kind of AI is what we do, whether it's Prey or Deathloop or Dishonored or Redfall. No matter what the rest of the structure of the game is, that gives you a lot of dynamic gameplay right there. It's procedural in nature, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about progression. So you kind of referred to it a little bit earlier. How does that work? So you said every character is individual, but you also, do you have like a player profile level with how much you've played to share for those points, so I guess for those shared talents that are across all your characters, or
no,
how does that set
they're
up?
all per character.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as you level up your Layla, you might have 3 Laylas going because maybe you just love Layla or you
3?
love Devender. And so you might have one Layla you play alone, one you play with some other friends because they're all 20th level. Then you have a Jacob you play with somebody else. And early on we had the decision to make of like, can we all be Devender? Can we all be Remy? And at first we were like, no, let's lock out the roles so that there's always a Devender, always a Layla if you have 4 people.
Yeah.
Ultimately we decided not to do that. We decided to just like, because it was just like, if you really want to play Remy, and I really want to play Remy, then like we should both be able to play Remy. And we have character costumes that change. So you can be Remy in her like rescue outfit or her, you know, hiking camping outfit. That differentiates to some extent. And then the way you build out your skills, the way I build out my skills, which weapons you have, which weapons I have, which remnants you found, which remnants I've found, it will feel different even if we're both playing Remy.
Right. So if I, say, have an end game character, like I'm at the end of the game, just beat it, really great, I want to go play with someone who's like halfway through, I don't bring my end game character with me, do I? Or do I?
You do. You can.
You do. Okay.
Yeah. There's so many times we started getting into the weeds of deciding how should this work or what rules should we put on it. And more we just came back to let the players do what they want. Like if you are hosting and your character is 40th level and my character's 3rd level and I come into the game with you, I'm gonna have a real hard time. You're gonna be saving me a lot, but I'm gonna level up faster because we're earning more experience or whatever. Put the power in the hands of the player, I think, is the right call.
What are the Ward, Blood, and Soul remnants? I saw those on the weapon screen.
They are objects that vampires were carrying when the psychic event happened, when they ascended, became a vampire basically. And so they're modified. They become like gameplay modifying objects. They have traits on them. And so they have various rarities and they will affect your gameplay in different ways. They're effectively magic items. One is more like defense oriented, one is more health oriented. You know, one affects how your skills work, or how your weapons work, things like that.
Okay. What are Gravelocks?
Yeah, that's another collectible that there's a finite number of, and there's a strong piece of narrative associated with each.
Okay.
They are from the perspective of a particular character that you'll get to know in the game, a sympathetic character, and they have gameplay modifying abilities as well. So there's a certain number of Gravelocks you can find in the world. How
does loot work as far as drops? So obviously, it'd be, I think, maybe a little weird if vampires dropped guns because they don't, as we saw, they don't use it. But how do you go about getting upgrades and things?
We put a lot of thought into that, and most of ours are like environmental storytelling scenes where you come upon a scene, and you might see some like a body on the street, and then you look up at the roof and there's a blood streak. It looks like this guy was dragged down the roof and dropped. So if you make your way up to that roof, you find he was hiding up there before someone caught him and threw him off the roof, and therefore there's a beer bottle and a sleeping bag and some stuff up there, and you loot it or whatever. So the loot typically feels appropriate to the faction. If it comes off, you stake a vampire and dig through the ashes, you might find a remnant or something to that effect. Psychically imbued magic item, basically. But like bellwether soldiers will have more likelihood to have military gear. If you lockpick a trunk and open it, it's, you know, might have a civilian shotgun in it or some flare ammunition or something like that. But as often as possible, we make them environmental storytelling scenes.
Okay. Is I guess ammo and such rather rare? Is it harder to find stuff, or is it pretty ample?
I would love to do a mode where it's super rare. But it's somewhere in the middle for this. It's not like you're ammo starved all the time, but it's also not like you have infinite ammo. Typically when you fight people, they'll drop some kind of ammo. Like the stake launcher has found ammo, right? Like it fires broken broom handles or pool cues or fireplace poker or something. So there'll be a bundle of stuff like that on the ground that you can load into that. If you're exploring an old boat on the harbor, it might have a first aid kit and flares in it or something to that effect. Yeah.
Thanks for coming by, Harvey.
Yeah, thank you.
We can't wait to hear more about Redfall soon. But in the meantime, we'll be right back with even more Summer of Gaming 2022. Don't go anywhere.